In the 12 years since it broke out, Syria's civil war has left more than 350,000 people dead and over 14 million displaced. The German Foreign Ministry says that Bashar al-Assad's regime continues to commit egregious human rights violations on a daily basis. And still, the powerful Arab League has decided to welcome Syria back to the fold after over a decade of regional isolation. Egypt's foreign minister announced the decision after meeting with his counterparts in Cairo. The Arab League had suspended Syria's membership in 2011 following Assad's crackdown on street protests that led to a devastating civil war. The decision is widely seen as a push to normalize ties with Assad. But the move was not welcome news in Idlib, the last city still held by Syria's opposition. Some 2 million Syrians displaced by the fighting now live in Idlib and its sprawling camps.
It was a big, unfortunate shock for us Syrians living in camps in the north. Instead of Arab leaders helping us and getting us out of those camps where we suffer and live in pain, they whitewashed the criminal and killer's hands of our blood.
We didn't benefit when the regime was not in the Arab League. So what if Assad's back in? We were displaced and forced to leave our towns. They're just like him. This is why they took him back. They're all useless.
We were shocked by this wrong decision. And we ask Arab leaders, not the people like us who are unable to do anything. Where are we headed?
And there's also been reactions from Syria's opposition. Badr Jamuz is the head of the opposition's negotiating team at the United Nations. In a tweet, he said the decision to allow the Assad regime's return to the Arab League represents, quote, forgetting the regime's crimes against human rights and a shock for the Syrian people struggling for freedom, democracy, and justice. He continued, we haven't been consulted about this decision, and it appears to be a clear disregard for the Syrian people's demands and aspirations. Let's look at the background and wider implications of this move and bring in journalist and Middle East expert Kristin Helberg. Ms. Helberg, good to see you. Why do you think the League decided to bring Assad back in from the cold? How did we get here?
I think the Arab leaders realized that Assad would stay in power for the time being and that isolating him really hadn't brought the region anywhere. So I think there are basically 3 reasons for this step, because however weak and destroyed Syria may be at present, it is very important because of its geopolitical position in the Middle East. It lies between Turkey and the Arab world, between Israel and Iran, so it's at a crossroads of the Middle East. The second reason would be that they don't want to leave Syria to the influence of others, especially to the influence of Russia, of Iran, of possibly even Turkey, where President Erdogan is willing to reconcile with Assad. So they wanted to bring back Assad and Syria to the Arab sphere of influence. And then the third reason is that there are tangible interests, because the Syrian crisis has very negative effects, especially on the neighboring countries. When we talk about refugees, when we talk about water issues, border security, drug smuggling. I mean, the Syrian regime controls and promotes the trade of captagon, a stimulant that is smuggled into Saudi Arabia via Jordan. So all these issues are supposed to be solved now with Assad. And this is the main reason why the Arab states now feel they have to re-engage with Damascus to handle all these issues.
And how unified was the Arab League in reaching this decision?
Well, first of all, for years there were different positions towards Syria, especially Saudi Arabia and Qatar were strong opponents of Assad because they were supporting the Syrian opposition and the insurgents, especially the Islamist forces among them. So these people obviously now feel betrayed and let down by this rehabilitation. But then we have, since 2018, basically, we have some countries who had begun to draw closer to Damascus, especially the United Arab Emirates, which last year became the first country to officially welcome Assad in their countries. Then we had other countries who followed past, Oman, Iraq, Lebanon, Algeria. So we had embassies that were opened, ministers were received, we had working meetings. So it was a slow but a continuous process that finally led to this final move of readmittance into the Arab League.
Let's look at it from the Syrian side then. How big a win is this for Bashar al-Assad?
Well, it is a big success for Assad. It's mainly on the diplomatic and the political level. But at the same time, I think we shouldn't overestimate it because Syria has been isolated regionally and internationally. It is still being sanctioned by the West, but it had always had other allies: Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, China, Venezuela. So I think the biggest win for Assad really is that he didn't have to give anything in exchange. Contrary to what the US kept on saying, that if you want to engage with Assad, make sure that you get something concrete in return. So it seems that this readmittance into the Arab League really comes somehow unconditional. And this is a big win for Assad.
Where does this decision leave the West? Because several states, including the US and Germany, have already said they will not resume ties with Assad. Is the West united in that view, or could we see a shift towards, you know, a normalization of ties there as well?
Well, until now, the US maintains its isolation vis-à-vis Assad. It disapproves the rapprochement of its partners in the Arab world, but it doesn't really do anything concrete against it. In Europe, to the contrary, there are calls for a more pragmatic approach to Damascus, especially in Eastern Europe countries. We have Poland, we have Hungary, Romania, but even Austria that are signaling a willingness to reach an understanding with Syria somehow, especially in view of sending Syrian refugees back. So Germany really is one of the very clear critics of the regime, whose crimes are being tried here in front of German courts, because we have crimes against humanity in the form of systematic state torture. We have leading intelligence officials from Syria who are wanted by international arrest warrants, so they cannot be made partners by a government like the German one. So the mood within the EU is no longer as clear as a few years ago. There is, yes, there's kind of two different positions even within Europe by now.
Yeah, that shift, does it mean that the Assad regime is here to stay?
I think for the time being, Bashar al-Assad will stay where he is. And on the long run, he might even be able to regain even more control within the country. He controls 3/3 of the country. But I think for the time being now, it's mainly a diplomatic step. It does not change too much on the ground because it is an international conflict that cannot be resolved regionally. And Assad is hoping for money for reconstruction. He needs investment from the Gulf countries. But even there, I think that companies will be hesitant in the face of massive corruption, in the face of mismanagement from the side of the regime. So I think it's of a high symbolic importance, but it will not change much, especially about the miserable situation of the Syrians on the ground within the country.
Christine Hellberg, many thanks for those insights.
Thanks to you.